There is perhaps no question more vital to the human heart than this. Am I walking beside the right soul, or have I tethered myself to the wrong one? Love is not merely a romance between two bodies. It is an encounter between two inner worlds. And when two inner worlds collide, they can either grow together or destroy one another. Many people confuse attachment with love, familiarity with destiny, and fear of loneliness with genuine connection. But the cost of staying with the wrong person is far greater than the pain of walking alone. Tonight, I want to offer you 5 signs, 5 guiding mirrors, that reveal whether you are truly with someone who nourishes your being, or whether you are trapped in a bond that depletes it. A relationship, at its core, should be the meeting of two souls who, through their union, grow larger than they were before. It should be a place where the spirit expands, where the imagination finds fertile ground, and where courage awakens in the presence of another. When we encounter the right companion, we are not diminished but enriched. We feel a widening of the horizon, as though the very boundaries of our being stretch outward into new landscapes of possibility. Our laughter carries further, our voices find more resonance, and even our fears seem lighter when they are met by the attentive gaze of someone who believes in us. But how often do we enter into relationships where the opposite occurs? Instead of growing, we begin to contract. Instead of discovering more of ourselves, we lose touch with what once made us alive. The wrong person does not necessarily wound us in obvious ways. Often, they quietly corrode our spirit. It is like the slow dripping of water wearing down stone, not always visible at first, but relentless over time. One day, you look in the mirror and realize that you have become smaller, quieter, less radiant than you once were. Imagine a bird whose wings are strong enough to cross entire valleys, but who is kept in a cage, its feathers dulled by the bars that surround it. This is what happens to the soul in the presence of a partner who cannot or will not nurture its flight. The cage may not even be locked. Sometimes it is built from words that mock, gestures that belittle, or the subtle yet constant withdrawal of support. And yet the bird remains, because fear whispers that it cannot survive in the wild alone. The tragedy is not only the cage, but the forgetting of flight itself. Consider the image of a garden. A flower does not fail because it is weak. It fails when the soil is barren, the sunlight obstructed, or the gardener careless. Human beings are much the same. In the wrong relationship, our soil becomes depleted. Our roots find no nourishment, no encouragement, no recognition of our essence. When love becomes a place where you must hide your voice, silence your desires, or apologize for your very nature, you are not in a sanctuary, but in poisoned ground. I recall the story of a woman who once carried within her the burning joy of creation. She painted each evening after work, losing herself in colors and forms, finding in them a kind of private freedom. But the man she loved dismissed her passion as childish, a waste of time that would never produce anything of value. At first, she resisted his disdain, but slowly, to avoid argument, she set down her brushes. Days passed, then months, then years. One day she realized not only that her canvases had gathered dust, but that her soul had as well. She was no longer the woman who once found light in pigments and shapes. She had become a shadow of that person, obedient but hollow. When she finally spoke of her grief, she said, "I gave up painting to keep his love, but in the end I lost myself, and without myself, what love was there to give?" This is the essence of shrinking love. It does not simply silence hobbies or minor interests. It silences the spirit. It robs us of authenticity. We no longer laugh with the same abandon. We no longer dare to dream as boldly. We no longer stand upright in the dignity of who we are. Instead, We fold ourselves into a smaller version of what feels acceptable to the other. We learn to live in fragments, not in fullness. And every time we cut off a piece of ourselves to keep the peace, we grow less alive. But why do we accept this? Why does the soul tolerate such erosion? Often it is because we confuse love with approval, or we confuse loyalty with submission. We tell ourselves that sacrifice is proof of devotion, that silencing ourselves is the price of harmony, that to shrink is noble if it means the relationship can survive. Yet true love does not demand that you diminish yourself. Love, in its authentic form, thrives only when two people bring their whole selves into its fire. Anything less becomes bondage, not union. The unconscious is wise, and it knows when we are betraying ourselves. We may not speak it aloud, but the body keeps score. Anxiety creeps in, a quiet depression hovers, the eyes lose their brightness, the inner voice becomes faint, whispering reminders of who we once were. Sometimes it shows up in dreams, where we find ourselves trapped in small rooms, unable to open the door, or trying to speak, but producing no sound. These are the soul's protests against shrinking. If you find yourself in a partnership where you cannot breathe fully, where your spirit feels restrained rather than released, then you are in the wrong place. A healthy bond does not clip your wings. It teaches you to fly higher. It does not mock your passions. It honors them as sacred expressions of who you are. It does not demand silence. It listens, even when it does not fully understand. Think of the relationships that have most transformed you, not only romantic ones, but friendships, mentors, even brief encounters. Did they not make you feel larger, braver, more at home in your skin? That is the mark of true connection. By contrast, when someone continually diminishes you, the soul begins to atrophy. And when the soul withers, no amount of outward appearances, wealth, comfort, or social approval can compensate for the loss. We must ask ourselves hard questions. Am I becoming more of who I am in this relationship, or less? Do I feel alive when I am with this person, or drained? Do I recognize the self I was before, or have I buried that self to keep the peace? These questions are not meant to condemn, but to awaken. For the cost of remaining in a shrinking love is nothing less than the forfeiting of our own essence. It is better to walk alone in freedom than to remain in chains disguised as affection. It is better to risk solitude than to abandon the soul's call. For only when we remain true to ourselves can we ever meet another in truth. And when we find that person, the one before whom we do not shrink but expand, we will recognize it instantly. Our wings will remember flight, our laughter will rise unforced, and our spirit will know it has come home. Conflict is inevitable in human relationships, for where two souls meet, there are always two histories, two wounds, two perspectives colliding. To expect a life without conflict is to deny the reality of our own complexity. The question is never whether we will face conflict, but whether that conflict will become the furnace of transformation or the prison of repetition. When two people are bound together in the wrong way, their quarrels do not deepen intimacy. They merely reenact the same old patterns over and over, like a haunting ritual that yields no new revelation. One might apologize, the other might forgive, but beneath the surface nothing has truly shifted. And so, days later or weeks later, the very same battle erupts again, slightly altered in form but identical in essence. There is a particular weariness that arises in such situations. You begin to sense that you are living the same day many times, like a dream in which you walk down a corridor only to find it looping back upon itself. The words spoken in anger are familiar, the promises to change feel rehearsed, and even the silence that follows has the taste of déjà vu. This cycle erodes hope, for deep down you know that the conflict is not leading anywhere. It is not a road toward deeper union, but a carousel that spins endlessly until your spirit feels dizzy and numb. In psychology, we might describe this as a loop, but in lived experience it feels more like entrapment. Imagine a river that flows toward the sea. In healthy love, conflict is like a stone that briefly obstructs the flow, causing turbulence, but eventually the water carries forward, smoother and stronger. In the wrong relationship, however, conflict is like a dam that never opens. The water swirls in circles, trapped in a stagnant pool, unable to move forward. You feel it in your body, the heaviness in your chest when the argument begins again, the knot in your stomach that tells you the end is already written before the first word is spoken. I once listened to a couple who had been arguing for over a decade about the same issues: money, household responsibilities, and respect. On the surface, these themes seemed practical, but at their root the quarrels reflected something deeper: the absence of true listening, of real change, of vulnerability. The husband would promise to help more around the house, but his promise was a ritual sacrifice offered only to quiet the storm, never a seed planted in the soil of transformation. The wife, on her side, had rehearsed her grievances so often that they had hardened into a script, spoken without hope of being heard. They were both trapped, not because they lacked love in some abstract sense, but because neither was willing to descend beneath the surface of the quarrel to face what was truly broken within themselves. Thus, their fights were never resolved, only recycled. The tragedy of recycled conflict is not simply the exhaustion it brings, but the way it eats at the bond of trust. Every unresolved fight adds a stone to the pile, until the weight of those stones becomes unbearable. You may still share a bed, still share meals, still share a name, but in truth you are living in separate emotional worlds, bound together only by the habit of repetition. There is an unspoken despair in such situations, the quiet recognition that you are speaking but not being heard, promising but not being believed, touching but not truly connecting. We must recognize that thriving couples do not avoid conflict. On the contrary, they embrace it as a necessary crucible. When they fight, something is brought into the open, examined and transformed. The disagreement becomes a mirror, reflecting back hidden wounds or unmet needs, and through that reflection, understanding is born. These couples leave an argument feeling not only lighter but closer, as though the storm has cleared the air and left them breathing more freely. There is a progression, a movement forward, a sense that even pain is not wasted but converted into intimacy. But when you are with the wrong person, conflict does not cleanse, it contaminates. It circles back upon itself without resolution, and you find yourself saying, "We've had this conversation 1,000 times." That phrase is not merely frustration, it is prophecy. It foretells that unless something fundamental changes, you will indeed have it 1,000 times more. The soul begins to wither under such repetition, for what is the point of speaking if the words cannot alter reality? What is the point of forgiving if forgiveness does not birth renewal? Some people convince themselves that recycling conflict is simply the nature of long-term relationships, but this is not true. The presence of recurring arguments is not a sign of endurance. It is a symptom of something more fundamental. It signals that the foundation is cracked. Just as a house built upon weak ground will creak and shift no matter how many times you repair the walls, so too a relationship built upon unresolved fractures will forever echo the same battles. And no amount of surface patching, temporary apologies, half-hearted compromises, can heal what lies at the root. There is also the danger of normalization. After years of recycled arguments, people begin to accept the cycle as inevitable. They stop hoping for transformation and instead learn to endure, to keep walking in circles because at least the path is familiar. But endurance is not the same as love, and familiarity is not the same as harmony. When conflict becomes a pattern rather than a passage, you are no longer journeying together. You are circling in the same wilderness, with no map and no exit. The unconscious, however, does not remain silent in such situations. It begins to manifest through restlessness, dreams of escape, fantasies of freedom. These are not betrayals of the relationship, but the psyche's attempt to remind you that your life is not meant to be a cycle of repetition without growth. The human soul longs for evolution, and when it finds itself trapped, it begins to cry out in symbols, in symptoms, in whispers that something is wrong. To recognize that conflict is never resolved, but only recycled, is to confront a painful truth. You are not climbing a wall together, you are beating your fists against it. And if year after year the wall does not move, perhaps it is not a wall meant to be scaled, but a boundary marking the limits of what this union can ever be. There is courage in admitting this, for it demands that we release the hope that repetition will someday become transformation. It requires that we accept the truth of what stands before us, not the fantasy of what we wish it could become. And in that acceptance, painful though it may be, there is also liberation. For it is better to face the truth and walk into freedom than to remain forever trapped in the labyrinth of recycled conflict, mistaking the dizziness of circles for the progress of a journey. Loneliness has many faces, but none so painful as the loneliness that creeps in when you are lying next to the very person who was meant to be your companion. To feel unseen in the presence of the one who promised to know you is to suffer a deeper wound than solitude itself. Solitude can hold dignity, it can be chosen, embraced, even sacred. But the loneliness of being unseen in relationship corrodes the spirit, because it whispers the most poisonous thought of all, that intimacy is not possible for you, that no one will ever truly touch the inner chambers of your soul. It is a loneliness that convinces you not only that you are alone, but that you are unworthy of being met. The ache of this form of loneliness is not loud at first. It begins quietly. You speak, and your words fall like stones into water, making no ripple. You share your fears, but they are brushed aside with dismissal or impatience. You reveal a part of your heart, hoping for tenderness, and it is met with silence, or worse, indifference. Over time you begin to stop speaking, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer believe there is anyone on the other side who is truly listening. The soul closes its doors, and though the body remains in the room, the inner self retreats into exile. I once heard a man describe this exile with haunting simplicity. He said, "I feel like I'm married to a ghost. She's here in body, but not in spirit." The image is devastating, yet many live in precisely this state. They share a home, a bed, a life, yet it feels as though they are reaching out through fog, their hands always empty. What is intimacy if not the meeting of souls? And if the soul of the other is absent, then what remains is but a hollow shell, a daily pantomime of togetherness without its substance. This form of loneliness is crueler than being physically alone. If you walk by yourself through life, you at least know you are alone. You know where you stand, But if you lie beside another and feel unseen, you live in a constant tension between presence and absence. The body is near, yet the spirit is far. You ache with confusion. How can I feel so invisible when someone is right here? That paradox is what wounds the deepest, because it makes you doubt your own perceptions, your own worthiness, your own sanity. Over time, the mind begins to compensate. Some convince themselves that this is simply what relationships are, that closeness inevitably fades and distance is natural. Others learn to numb themselves, distracting their hunger for intimacy with work, with entertainment, with endless busyness. And yet beneath it all remains the silent hunger of the soul, the longing to be seen, known, recognized in the depths. This hunger does not die. It only grows more desperate, sometimes turning into resentment, sometimes into despair. There is an ancient truth. The opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. Hate at least acknowledges your existence. It sees you, even if it sees you as an enemy. Indifference, however, erases you. To pour your words, your affection, your essence into someone and receive nothing in return is to feel as though you do not exist. And what is more devastating to the human heart than the sense that it does not matter, that its presence or absence would make no difference to the one it has chosen? The human being is not nourished only by food or shelter. We are nourished by recognition, by the gaze of another who looks into us and says, "I see you." From childhood, we know this instinctively. A child who is unseen by her parents suffers a wound that lasts long into adulthood, for she learns that her inner world has no witness. The same is true in adult love. Without recognition, without presence, the bond becomes starvation in disguise. You may share a table, but you are not fed. You may share a bed, but you do not rest. The one who constantly begs for attention, affection, or presence is not asking for luxuries. They are asking for oxygen. And if you must beg for air in a relationship, then you are suffocating. You are not with a partner. You are with a shadow. A shadow cannot love you, cannot know you, cannot hold you. It may mimic the outline of a human being, but it is empty of substance. And if you tie your life to a shadow, you will spend your days chasing an illusion, hoping that one day it will turn solid and return your gaze. But shadows do not transform into people. They remain empty projections. Loneliness in togetherness also breeds shame. You begin to wonder if the problem lies within you. Perhaps you are asking for too much. Perhaps you are difficult. Perhaps your longing for depth is a flaw. This is the cruelest trick of all, that being unseen makes you doubt your very right to be seen. But understand this, your longing for intimacy is not weakness. It is the most human of desires. To want to be known fully and to know another in return is not excess. It is the very essence of love. The soul cannot thrive in neglect. It may endure for a time, but eventually it revolts. Sometimes the revolt is dramatic, an eruption of anger or betrayal. More often it is quiet, the dulling of joy, the fading of vitality, the slow extinguishing of inner fire. You become a shadow of yourself, mirroring the shadow that lies beside you. Life becomes a performance of roles, partner, spouse, companion, while the essence of connection is absent. There is a painful recognition that often comes to those who live in this state. It is better to be truly alone than to feel invisible in the presence of another. To walk alone may be frightening, but at least your solitude is honest. To walk with a ghost is to live in dishonesty every day, pretending that love exists when, in truth, it has already fled. The danger of enduring such loneliness is that it teaches you to accept less than you deserve. It convinces you that intimacy is rare, perhaps impossible, and so you cling to what little presence you have, even if it is hollow. But I tell you this, genuine presence, genuine recognition, is not a fantasy. It exists. There are those who can and will see you not as a role, not as a convenience, but as a soul. To settle for anything less is to betray yourself. When you find yourself in such a state, do not ignore the ache. The ache is truth speaking through your body, reminding you that you were not created to be unseen. The longing you feel is not a flaw, it is your compass. It points you away from the shadows and toward the light of authentic connection. And though the path to that light may be painful, requiring courage, requiring loss, it is the only path where the soul can truly breathe. Love in its truest form is the great liberator of the human spirit. It does not bind, it does not suffocate, it does not reduce. It breathes into us a sense of expansion, the courage to step further into ourselves, the permission to become more than we were yesterday. When love is authentic, it does not hover like a shadow of control, nor does it poison us with fear. It becomes instead a sanctuary, a space where both souls can move freely without the threat of punishment or abandonment. To love and be loved in this way is to feel at home not only in the world, but also in one's own skin. Yet how many enter into relationships where love is distorted into something darker, something that feeds not on freedom but on fear? The wrong person transforms affection into a kind of cage. You are made to believe that to keep their love, you must tiptoe carefully, watch every word, anticipate every mood. Instead of breathing, you are holding your breath. Instead of speaking, you are editing yourself before each word leaves your lips. You live under the constant dread of their disappointment, their withdrawal, their anger. Love, which should have been a source of strength, becomes a source of dread. Fear in love often disguises itself as devotion. You tell yourself you are simply being careful, respectful, attentive. But beneath the surface lies something corrosive. The belief that love is conditional, that it can be taken from you if you do not behave correctly, that you must constantly prove yourself worthy. This is not love. It is bondage. True love does not need you to prove your right to exist. It delights in your existence as it is. I recall listening to a woman who said that her partner's moods were like unpredictable storms. One day he would shower her with warmth, the next he would withdraw into cold silence, punishing her with distance. She never knew what would trigger the storm, so she began to shrink her world. She avoided laughter in case it irritated him, avoided questions in case they annoyed him, avoided expressing her sadness in case it was deemed weakness. Over time, she became a shell of herself, imprisoned not by chains of iron, but by chains of fear. She said, "I used to feel alive, but now I feel like I'm waiting for the next wave of disapproval, waiting for the next time I'm told I am too much or not enough." That is not the voice of love. That is the cry of a soul held hostage. When fear becomes the currency of a relationship, authenticity dies. You can no longer show your true self, for your true self feels dangerous. You censor your thoughts, you hide your emotions, you calculate your movements as though you were walking across thin ice. The tragedy is that the very heart that longed to give love becomes preoccupied with survival. The focus shifts from genuine connection to self-protection, and connection withers in the process. We must remember that love is meant to be expansive. The right person does not shrink your freedom, they celebrate it. They do not demand that you abandon your passions, they encourage them. They do not require that you conform to their image of who you should be. They delight in discovering the depths of who you truly are. When freedom is present, trust flourishes. And in that trust, intimacy becomes not something fragile to be managed with care, but something alive, something that breathes with ease. By contrast, when freedom is absent, even the smallest acts can feel like rebellion. To express an opinion becomes dangerous, to say no becomes betrayal, to ask for space becomes rejection. This is the great inversion of fear-based love. Freedom is redefined as disloyalty. The wrong partner convinces you that your individuality is a threat, that your independence is a sign you do not care, that your desire to grow is a sign you wish to leave. And so, you begin to imprison yourself to prove your devotion. But devotion that requires self-erasure is not devotion at all. It is surrender to control. There is a saying, if you cannot be free with someone, you are not safe with them. Safety in love is not the absence of conflict, nor is it the constant approval of every action. It is the deep knowing that you can be fully yourself without fear of abandonment. When you are safe, you can speak your truth, show your flaws, reveal your dreams, and know that even if the other does not always understand, they will not punish you for being who you are. But when you are unsafe, love becomes a performance. You wear masks, you play roles, you twist yourself into shapes that please the other while betraying yourself. And the soul grows weary under the weight of these masks, for it longs to be naked and seen as it is. The human spirit is not designed to live in fear. Fear is a constrictor. It narrows the world, strangles vitality, and silences joy. Love that feeds on fear does not nurture, it consumes. It drains energy, creates anxiety, breeds self-doubt. It turns passion into obligation and tenderness into calculation. You may stay in such a relationship for months or years, but the cost is always the same, the slow death of your own essence. Some justify staying in fear-based love by telling themselves that all relationships require sacrifice. They confuse sacrifice with suppression, loyalty with silence. They believe that enduring fear is proof of devotion, but sacrifice without freedom is not noble. It is destructive. Love that thrives on fear is not love. It is control cloaked in the language of care. And no matter how convincing the cloak, the body knows the truth. The body feels the anxiety, the restlessness, the perpetual vigilance. The body does not lie. We must ask ourselves, does this relationship make me more alive or more afraid? Do I wake each day with a sense of possibility or with a sense of dread? Am I expanding into who I am, or am I contracting to avoid conflict? These are not abstract questions. They are the most concrete measures of whether love is real or counterfeit. For love that is real will always allow freedom. Love that is false will always demand fear. There is profound courage in recognizing this truth, because it often means confronting the reality that you are not safe where you are. It means facing the fear of loss, the fear of solitude, the fear of beginning again. But freedom is always worth the risk. To remain in chains and call it love is to betray the very soul that longs for liberation. To break those chains is not an act of betrayal against the other. It is an act of fidelity to yourself. And when you do find love that does not feed on fear, but thrives on freedom, you will know it instantly. You will breathe more easily, your laughter will come without calculation, your silences will feel comfortable, not threatening, you will not be punished for your independence but celebrated for it. That is the kind of love the soul recognizes as home, the love that does not control but liberates. There is within each of us a quiet knowing, a voice that does not shout but whispers, a subtle current that guides us even when our rational minds resist. It is the voice of the soul, the compass of intuition, and though we may try to silence it with explanations, excuses, or wishful thinking, it does not vanish. It waits patiently, pressing gently against the walls of our consciousness until one day we can no longer ignore it. When we ask ourselves how to know if we are with the wrong person, Perhaps the most telling sign of all is this inner whisper. Long before our minds are willing to admit it, long before we dare to articulate it aloud, our intuition already knows. The mind is clever at building narratives. It tells us things will improve with time. Maybe I am simply too demanding. Maybe all relationships feel heavy like this. Maybe love is meant to hurt. These stories are not truth, but self-preservation. They are the walls we build around the discomfort of knowing, because to acknowledge what our intuition already tells us would require action, courage, and change terrifies us more than suffering. We prefer to endure the slow erosion of the soul rather than confront the unknown path of liberation. But intuition cannot be deceived by our rationalizations. It does not bargain. It continues to whisper whether we heed it or not. The body itself becomes the messenger of intuition. What the soul cannot express in words, the body speaks in symptoms. Anxiety, restlessness, heaviness in the chest, knots in the stomach. These are not random afflictions, but signals. The psyche is saying, you are not where you belong, you are not aligned with truth. The body knows when we are betraying ourselves, even if the mind is stubbornly loyal to illusion. You may call it stress, you may call it fatigue, but beneath those names is a deeper message. Your being is rejecting the life you are forcing upon it. I remember a man who stayed with his partner for a decade, silencing his inner doubts because he feared the chaos that truth would bring. He told himself that leaving would be selfish, that she needed him, that breaking the bond would destroy the life they had built. And so, year after year, he ignored the voice within, hoping it would quiet down. But intuition does not quiet down. It grows louder in silence. Finally, when he could bear it no more, he walked away. He said to me with tears in his eyes, "The silence inside me is louder than her presence ever was. I should have listened years ago." His words captured the essence of intuition. When we ignore it, we do not escape pain. We only prolong it. So many people dismiss their intuition as if it were a burden, a nuisance, an inconvenience that interrupts their plans. Yet intuition is not a burden. It is the compass by which we navigate the wilderness of life. Without it, we are lost, wandering endlessly through deserts that lead nowhere. With it, even if the road is painful, it leads us toward authenticity, toward a life where we are aligned with what is real. To ignore intuition is to live as a stranger to ourselves. To listen to it is to return home. But listening to intuition requires courage, for it often calls us to walk away from what feels familiar, what feels safe, what feels expected by others. It may ask us to leave the relationship that looks perfect on the outside but is hollow within. It may demand that we endure loneliness for a time rather than suffocate in a false companionship. It may tell us that we deserve more than what we have settled for, and to believe that truth is sometimes the hardest step of all. Yet the soul does not lie. It cannot be bribed with comfort or security. It will continue to whisper until the day we either listen or lose ourselves entirely. There are those who mistake intuition for fear, but the difference is clear. Fear paralyzes, while intuition points the way forward. Fear tells us, stay where you are, do not risk. Intuition tells us, there is something truer waiting for you if you dare. Fear contracts the heart, but intuition, even when it speaks of leaving, carries a strange clarity, a strange peace. It does not argue, it simply knows. So many of us live our lives waiting for certainty from the outside. We wait for undeniable proof, for signs that others can validate, for reasons that can withstand the scrutiny of logic. But the inner compass does not offer proofs, it offers direction. It speaks not in arguments but in resonance. When something is right, you feel it in the ease of your breath, the openness of your chest, the aliveness in your spirit. When something is wrong, you feel it in the weight of dread, the tightness of silence, the hollow ache that no amount of rationalization can erase. In truth, every person knows whether they are with the wrong partner long before they admit it. The signs are not hidden, they are etched into their dreams, their fatigue, their loneliness, but acknowledgement requires action, and action requires courage, and so many linger, waiting for some external force to make the decision for them, to break the bond so that they will not have to. Yet life rarely does this for us. It is we who must eventually choose between betraying ourselves or betraying the illusion. There is great sorrow in realizing that you ignored your own knowing for too long. But there is also redemption, for the moment you decide to listen, the moment you place your trust back into your inner compass, you begin to heal. You reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned. You stand again in the dignity of your own truth. And in that truth you open the possibility of a love that is not counterfeit, not hollow, not laced with dread, but real. To follow intuition is not to choose the easier road. It often leads through valleys of grief, of endings, of uncertainty, but it is the only road that leads to freedom, for to betray your intuition is to betray your soul, and nothing corrodes a life more than living against the grain of its own essence. If you hear the whisper within you, do not dismiss it. Do not drown it with noise, do not smother it with excuses, do not numb it with distractions. Listen, that voice is your oldest ally, your truest guide. It will not abandon you, even if you abandon it. And one day, if you honor it, you will find yourself standing where you belong, breathing fully again, alive in the kind of love that does not silence the soul, but awakens it. So how do you know if you are with the wrong person? Look for these signs. Your soul shrinks, conflict never resolves. Loneliness pervades even in company. Fear replaces freedom, and your intuition aches with truth. Life is too precious to waste in a bond that diminishes you. The right person is not perfect, but they are a mirror in which you see the best version of yourself reflected back. And if you find yourself with the wrong one, remember, letting go is not failure. It is the ultimate act of self-love, the courage to choose a path where your soul can finally breathe.